Welcome to Talking Africa, the latest in a brand new series here on Arise News. This is a special weekly edition of Africa Wrap, where we take time to reflect on the fortunes and affairs of the emerging continent within its own countries and across the world in an hour of conversation with African commentators and thought leaders. Time now to welcome my first guest today. Wallace Williams is a renowned poet, pan-Africanist, businessman, and the first ever ambassador of Antigua and Barbuda in Nigeria. Ambassador Williams is here for a special reason tonight, and that reason is the several weeks of anti-immigrant violence that are spread through Durban and Johannesburg in South Africa. The attacks, which have seen people lose their lives and businesses, have been particularly hard for him, as he's spent his entire life campaigning against this type of black-on-black violence. Well, before we go on, let's take a look at the images from South Africa, which have shocked the world.
The South African High Commission in Lagos is closed. Its doors shut after South African officials reacted to anti-xenophobic protests outside its gate. The protests were sparked by a wave of attacks against immigrants that have rocked Johannesburg and Durban in recent days.
They came in mass. They came with some vehicle, and like that they came to submit the letter of memorandum from them that say no to xenophobia. So they give to the South Africa personnel here. So that is why that's why they decided not to come yesterday and today. And it's duty of police to protect life and property. That is why we are on ground to maintain the ground. So for people not to come and use violence here or whatever.
As a result of the attacks, some South African businesses have become the targets of retaliation in Nigeria. South Africa's commissioner attempted to calm the tense situation, warning against continuing protests. But he says the consulate will remain closed until Thursday. It's an inconvenience to Nigerian workers who want to return to work in South Africa despite the recent anti-migrant violence.
I'm only aware that they received their citizens on Tuesday and Wednesdays. That's why I'm here, to inquire about my renewal. So but they said I should come back tomorrow. The embassy is not open today.
7 have died in the anti-immigrant violence in Durban and Johannesburg, and thousands of migrants have fled. Zimbabwe is repatriating some 2,000 of its citizens who requested help in the wake of the attacks. South African authorities have arrested 11 men at a Johannesburg hostel suspected of involvement in anti-immigrant violence. They were held during a joint raid by the police and the army, after the government said they are assigning additional defense forces to end this recent wave of anti-immigrant violence. Julia Kalanina, Arise News.
And Ambassador Wallace Williams is here with me now. Thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Arise News. Firstly, were you surprised at the scale of anti-immigrant sentiment in South Africa, a country that you're familiar with?
Yeah, I was absolutely shocked and horrified. You know, those of us who campaigned during the 70s for a free South Africa, the help that Nigeria gave and the rest of the world, you know, a lot of the blacks in the diaspora, you know, to see this turn around where they are going to be attacking is essentially people who have actually fought for and perhaps felt they had a right to be there to support and perhaps participate in the economy of South Africa, contribute maybe, find a job, etc. And I would have thought that South Africans would have opened their arms and welcomed them. And I'm talking about the black Africans within South Africa, because of course we have Afrikaners and others, right? But I would have thought that Africa and Africans within the diaspora would have said, welcome.
Well, beyond the surprise that you felt, what do you think was behind it?
I think economics, I think skills, lack of jobs, I think lack of education, because if you don't have education and you're not trained in entrepreneurship, which is really what they're seeing, some of the places that were being destroyed were, for example, Nigerians and a lot of other Africans who are entrepreneurs. The entrepreneurial skills that people brought there and made it a success perhaps was a gap that Africans themselves there were not seeing, or perhaps did not have the facilities, you know, like SMEs, you know, being funded by banks, you know, and other, what do we call it, housing companies that help you. So cooperatives, perhaps, you know, South Africans perhaps could have formed themselves into cooperatives, set up shops, set up businesses, and do it. I'm horrified.
But, I mean, you spend quite a lot of time in South Africa yourself. Do you think racism is still a key issue there? Because almost perversely, I mean, this was, some people are saying it's not actually xenophobia, it's Afrophobia.
Yes, well, I think perhaps, you know, Africans in South Africa have probably been beaten about the head too much. Let's just use a very basic term. And they perhaps started to adopt the racism that they felt. You know, it's almost like when you get, you know, when somebody beat up on you, you know, you're going to find somebody else to beat up on, right? So mentally and psychologically, perhaps they're affected. And they've seen it happen to them, and they've said, well, all right, these people are strangers, they don't belong here. Let's attack them because they are successful and we are not.
That's a very interesting point. Do you think the ANC that's in power in South Africa should have anticipated this sort of thing and perhaps done more to stop
Absolutely.
it?
They should have had some sort of plan with regards to border control, who they're bringing in. I mean, you know, when you look around the world like Canada and other places, you have economic migrants, but you also have people who come with skills and they're accepted, they're given, you know, citizenship, etc. And perhaps they should have looked at that and say, well, okay, we're going to take in some of our African brothers, but let's, you know, put some markers on them. Those who have skills and vocations and entrepreneurs and have funds that they're bringing in, let's bring them. And the others could perhaps come in, you know, as supporters in terms of job employees. You know, what skills do you have? And do some sort of filtering. And because to just, in a sense, have opened the borders wide,
yes,
you are going to have...
Well, let's face it, there's a lot of foreigners.
Yes, there's a lot of foreigners, and you're going to have repercussion.
Absolutely.
You will have repercussion, but I did not expect
that it would be this bad.
That it would be this bad.
Now, as we mentioned in the introduction, you're well known for your strong pan-African views and your support for multinational organizations that tend to unify the continent and the African diaspora, such as the African Union. I mean, we'll talk about the African Union later.
Have reacted almost immediately. Why? The foreigners who are in South Africa are members of African states. Whilst internally the ANC and the President Zuma's government has their own internal policies that they have to deal with and get it right and ensure that these people are protected, the African Union should also, if they are doing anything at all, you know, should react straight away and say, look, this should not be happening, and call South Africa to order.
Right.
Because that is what they're there for.
Absolutely.
They're an African Union to look at problems, whether it's Boko Haram in Nigeria, whether it's what is now happening in South Africa. The African Union should be a little bit more agile.
Now, one of the reasons cited for these tensions in South Africa is a lack of jobs. But of course, South Africa is the second largest economy in Africa and the most sophisticated, the most developed, if you like. But the suggestion is that essentially the ANC government has left job creation to market forces. And this is the clearest indication or the evidence that free market cannot solely be relied on for job creation, and therefore there should have been some measure of government intervention.
Yes, government must be an enabling, right, vehicle. They must be also responsible for a lot of their citizenry, whether it's for social being looked after, and you know, unemployment benefits, and the way to look at supporting. You know, you've come out of apartheid. You're going to have quite a lot of people who did not have education, who did not have skills, who were not vocationally qualified. You've got to look after them. That's your prime responsibility. You're not going to say, right, we're free now, just leave it to the economy. You have a responsibility. You definitely have a responsibility as a government, as an ANC that fought for your black persons within South Africa. The Afrikaners have their, you know, their economies and being looked after by their, call it tribe. And they're right. So ANC should have looked after their tribe too. So they fought for that.
Would you say that these attacks are the results of the work of a few extremists, or do you think that that level of resentment is very wide?
I think it's very wide. I think it's very wide. And it's very wide because it is touching in almost every part of South Africa.
So now you've got all these refugees in camps in Johannesburg, in Durban. What do you think should happen next to those people? Do you think it's the best way forward is for them to leave and go back to their countries?
Well, it is for the South African government to decide, but I think African Union, this is where we're coming back to African Union, should look at it and say, okay, come to some sort of compromise. Are there people who could contribute to the South African economy within these refugee status? Can you give them asylum? Can you make them South African citizens? Would they be able to be absorbed? With the kind of xenophobia that's happening, it may not be such a wise idea. If the African Union is to step in, then they need to look at how do we deal with this problem.
Right. Now, you draw an interesting parallel between recent events in South Africa and similar violence in the Caribbean. In Trinidad, for example, the murder rate is roughly 3,000 per 10 million population each year and rising, the highest of any region worldwide, and 75% of it is young sort of black-on-black violence.
Absolutely.
You've written this research into a book. Do you think South Africa's young population is a major factor as well in that type of violence?
Absolutely, because the trend is right around the world. Youth unemployment, linking the poverty ladder with lack of education is real. The statistics prove it. In my book, Caribbean Youth at Risk, you would have seen from the statistics, there's a link between how far you are up the education ladder and how much you will earn over your lifetime. And if you do not finish school, if you do not get a skill, if you do not reach at least to the end of your school 5-year, let's say O-levels and A-levels, you can forget it. You are going to be out on the job market, right? You are going to be a victim and also a fodder for gangs.
When we come back, we'll be taking a closer look at Ambassador Williams' work to end black-on-black violence, his poetry, and his ongoing commitments to pan-Africanism. Do stay with us.
The best way to predict the future is to create it. There's a special breed of achievers out there called tomorrow's people. They imagine what will be and strive to make it happen. They refuse to wait for the future. Tomorrow bends and conforms to their ideas. At Access Bank, we share the same sentiments. Our mantra for success is simple: speed, service, and security. Tomorrow's people own the future because they keep the world turning. That is the power of taking tomorrow.
In conversation with my guest this week, campaigner and diplomat Ambassador Wallace Williams. Now, before you began work in Nigeria, you were a well-known radical poet. This song challenging black-on-black violence. Let's take a listen.
Hey. Can you see these people using?
What is this madness? What is this madness? this, my brothers. We can't keep killing ourselves. Respect your elders. Respect family. Respect yourself. Respect yourself. Respect yourself. No more. Black versus black. Black versus black.
Hey! Black versus black is the method of attacking us, yes. Black versus black is the method of dividing us, yes. Don't be their work tool. Don't make yourself a damn fool. I say, don't let them let you murder your own black brother for the price of a bullet. Hey! They give you fancy car, provide you with nice apartment, yeah. When you finish, kill your brother. You end up with not one damn cent in your pocket.
Black versus black.
And of course, Ambassador Wallace Williams is with us here. Just tell me what was behind this track. What were the main issues that drove you to produce it?
Well, similar to the book I wrote, Caribbean Youth at Risk, what was I seeing? In Trinidad, I'm seeing black-on-black violence mainly. These are the kids in Laventille, Morvan. You fast track over to the United States, it's the same thing in Los Angeles. You fast track into Jamaica, in Tivoli Gardens, it's the same thing. It's rising now in St. Lucia, St. Vincent, Antigua, you know, all perhaps on a smaller scale, but it is the same thing. You look now at, you know, Nigeria and Boko Haram, you know, killing Christians, that's again black-on-black violence. Now, we've reached the pinnacle, as far as I'm concerned, where you've reached to South Africa, which is a country that people like us.
So what do you think is the common theme that percolates through all of that?
I think it's one, lack of self-esteem, right, which is associated with lack of education and lack of skills. If you're going to go home and you cannot feed your child and your family, you're going to look for a scapegoat. You know, you tell yourself, I have not succeeded in life, I need to make quick money. So if I need to make, so if you're thrown out of school, the easiest family is the gang. You're going to have the Bimmer, you know, the BMW, the bling bling, the girls, fast, you know, fast step. I'll tell you an example. In Trinidad, the former Minister of National Security one morning had an interview with me and a meeting, and he showed me on the screen young 11-year-olds shooting in the air. But what made me sad, he told me that they don't expect to live past 21. They actually go and pay for their coffins and the funerals in advance, and the hymn that they want, etc. So when this is frustrating.
That is absolutely shocking.
It's shocking because what it means is that they do not no longer value life. Because as far as they are seeing it, their life means nothing.
So was that what made you go back into the recording studio? Because you thought this was a medium with which you could try to reach those people?
Absolutely, because it's with a message. The message is, that's why I'm not focusing on me. You'll see it's just, you know, a voice. It's a message. I'm talking to them as an elder. And I'm saying, you got to stop this. Look at ways of being successful. Get back into school, get back into education, get back into vocational.
So is it your sense that this black-on-black violence is getting worse?
It is. Well, we are here. We are now here. Look at it. It is getting absolutely worse.
And how relevant is this same message to Africans today?
Well, we have to stop what we've just seen. And we are saying that if we continue that, what are we going to be doing? There'll be a process of attrition, you know, where young blacks are concerned. Because if they take on the persona of what they see in the United States, you know, the music, the dance, the bling, etc., that is the lifestyle that they're aiming for. You know, they are focusing more on, let's be a big musician, let's be a footballer. And if they don't make it, because these are short-term careers, 5 years at the most, 7, if at all, right? Some 3. So after that, what are you going to do? If you don't make it, what are you going to do? You need to get yourself a skill, you know, a vocational skill, I would say, more than anything else, because not everybody are academics.
There are not that many Caribbean people who have this kind of global vision of an African diaspora that you have. Do you remember the first time that Pan-Africanism became a central part of your life?
Yes. Reading Frantz Fanon, right? And I spent a day in Clapham in my house with Walter Rodney from Guyana, you know, who wrote, you know, several books, How You Up on the Developed Africa, etc. And that was a significant turning point for me. And during my early days in Trinidad, right, I realized that, you know, at that time, we were going through the 60s, you know, blacks were third-class citizens, fourth or fifth class, you know, and then you link that with what was happening in the United States, link that with what's happening in South Africa, Zimbabwe, and South Africa, and then you link that with what was happening in the Caribbean, where you had the mulattoes and, you know, blacks in Trinidad had to, you know, there was a revolution in Trinidad in 1970 because of that very same thing.
Now the African Union, well, its precursor, the Organization of African Unity, and then the African Union were seen as a huge step forward for the Pan-African movement.
Yes.
But I mean, in terms of dealing with crises such as Boko Haram and all the other stuff, this violence in South Africa, I mean, a lot of people have been left disappointed. How would you respond to that? Because you're a diplomat. You talk to all those people.
Yeah, I think the African Union needs some sort of change. They need a revision, you know, of their approach. I think they need new life. I think they need a lot of younger people in there who is going to give them a boost. And because it's young people's issues. Most of the things we're talking about now, Charles, is all about young people's issues, jobs, you know, schooling. Those are the things that are affecting the younger generation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, stay with us, Ambassador. Time for another very short break here. But when we come back, we'll be discussing something not often recognized, which is the parallels and historical links between the Caribbean and Africa. Please stay with us. We're back in a moment.
Wherever and whatever your banking needs, Guarantee Trust Bank will be there, now and into the future. Because you're at the heart of everything we do. Guarantee Trust Bank, proudly African, truly international.
Welcome back to Talking Africa here on Arise News as we continue the conversation with my guest this week, poet and diplomat Ambassador Wallace Williams. Ambassador, you've been Nigeria's ambassador to Antigua, well, Antigua and Barbuda ambassador to Nigeria for 7 years. Yeah, Honorable Consul for 7 years. What have been some of the key challenges for you in this period?
I think the main thing is bringing together that diaspora, the Caribbean diaspora, with Nigeria, looking at opportunities. And I took, you know, quite a few Nigerian entrepreneurs down to Antigua. They were looking at, for example, tourism aspect. Antigua, on the other hand, is looking at, you know, who can come with foreign direct investment, you know, to assist, you know, a small country, but like most of the other Caribbean countries that have economic problems, you know.
Well, one of the logical places where there could be some cooperation, business cooperation, has got to be tourism, hasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the key things that I've been pushing for is a direct flight to the Caribbean using Antigua as a hub. Because with Antigua as a hub, it's close to the United States and it's close to the rest of the Caribbean. And if we can get that there, then, you know, you have a flow of people from the Caribbean going up to Africa, you know, via that route. It's just straight across the Atlantic. It's a 9 or 10 hour flight.
Now, you were quite close to President Jonathan, who's now on his way out. Are you confident that you'll be able to continue your work under the President-elect, General Buhari?
I wouldn't say close. The closeness is, of course, talking
well,
about
you're
opportunities.
An ambassador.
One of the opportunities was looking at getting some of the Niger Delta people trained in oil and gas, which I promoted in 2010 to him, and it was achieved eventually through the Niger Delta Amnesty group, right, that he created through Kuku, his special assistant. So that was a major achievement, because I put the idea that, look, economies are similar, in terms of oil and gas. Why not send some of them there to be trained? And there's been some success in that department. But the hub of tourism, right, Antigua has quite a lot to offer.
Right.
And I think the putting together of the flight, let's say once a week, a charter flight to start with, is a great step forward to bring the Caribbean diaspora into West Africa to start with. And from there you can go on. I mean, from Nigeria, as you know, you have flights going to South Africa, East Africa, etc. So it's a great hub to hub.
Right.
If you look at it, that a hub and spoke, Antigua for the Caribbean and North America and South America, Nigeria for West Africa, East and South Africa.
And I'm also made to understand that the Caribbean is now a member of the African Union.
Yeah, they are. And that happened when President Obasanjo was in Trinidad for emancipation.
How do you think that's changed relations between the Caribbean and Africa, or at least affected?
Well, I think it was very welcome, because now Africans in the Caribbean saw themselves as being recognized as part of the African diaspora. And those who have natural links because of the culture, great-grandparents who told them this is, this is their home, this is where they came from, etc. It is like a recognition. Say, you are my long-lost brother or my long-lost cousin, welcome back.
But that's a start.
That's a start.
What would you like to see? What kind of unity between the two places?
Well, commissions, you set up a bilateral commission between the two areas. So let's say a Caribbean commission with ECOWAS, and then with SADC in South Africa and others. I think that's a good starting point, because obviously looking at it from a country to country or region to region point of view, then let's have a Caribbean commission, right? We already have CARICOM, but specifically set up to work with ECOWAS and specifically set up to work with SADC and the other African unions and with the AU.
The problem, of course, is that you're really looking at the big countries out of the Caribbean and the big countries out of Africa. I mean,
not necessarily.
Technically, Nigeria and South Africa, enormous potential, maybe Gambia, Ghana, a few of the others, and then a couple of, countries in the Caribbean, but most of them are so small that you can generate very little business. Well,
you have the CARICOM and you have the OECS, which is the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States. These are bloc countries. CARICOM is the whole Caribbean region. OECS is the small islands. The bloc can work with, the ECOWAS bloc. They could work with SADC, which is the South African states, not necessarily South Africa alone. I mean, there's opportunities in all the other islands, and there's opportunities in all the other states.
Now, before you go, I've got to get you to tell me the story. And that was your encounter in Nigeria with the famous Fela Kuti, and all that happened with your music. And actually, first of all, and very briefly, though, your encounter with the Virgin Records in the UK when you were trying to make a song. And I think it was...
Well, it was an album, actually. It was an album. But before that, let me just mention the fact that I've also been appointed the ambassador for the Pan-African Strategic Research Policy Group. And that is Pan-Africanism in essence, looking at the Caribbean as their ambassador to the Caribbean. So the Pan-Africanism that we are talking about, I am actually now appointed to play a role in that regard. So I needed to tell you that.
Yeah, very important.
Very good. Important.
But I think you're the right man for it.
Thank you very much. Now, the story about Virgin Records, in 1977, I was signed to Virgin myself and Linton Kwesi were signed on the same day. He was
Linton Kwesi is the
poet,
Caribbean poet who's
doing
released
Jamaica.
a lot of songs.
Yeah,
and all
exactly, with Island Records, with Virgin as well. And we both were signed on the same day. I was handling a lot of the African liberation, anti-apartheid stuff, etc. So we recorded the album, etc., and it was being mixed in Oxford Studios, Virgin Oxford Studios. And the engineer, you know, didn't like the lyrics that he was hearing. It was a little bit too strong in those days because you're talking about killings in South Africa. At that time it was apartheid, you know, killings in South Africa. And he called, at the time, I think it was Richard Branson's partner, you know, Simon Draper, and said he doesn't like what he's hearing, and this guy is a stirrer, and blah, 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 etc. Well, I heard that, and then he said, I think we should just can it, which is the euphemism for, you know, parking it aside and never releasing it. When I heard that, I thought, no, this is dangerous. So I rewinded the tape, and I left with it. I ran away. I just left.
So you took the tape, basically?
I took the tape, and I took it to Nigeria.
Because you were worried they were just going to basically can it, and that was going to be the end of that.
You know, they didn't want it to come out. So I took it to Nigeria.
And this was in the 1970s?
Yeah, this was in the 1970s. And I thought I had lost the tape. 30 years after. Or
30 years after. It was a pure coincidence. A friend of mine who was doing television commercials in Nigeria said, he picked me up at my house in Idejo Street in Nigeria and said, oh, we're going to, you know, we're going up to Ikeja to his place, and let's just stop off and... Ikeja is in Lagos.
In Lagos, of course. So when he said, all right, let's stop, I stopped, and, you know, he said he was going upstairs to see a friend, you know, and he just mentioned the name. So I'm going upstairs to see Femija. I said, who? Said Femija. I said, I left the tape with, couldn't find him after 30 years, because don't forget, we didn't have telephone density as we had then. So I ran upstairs, saw Femi Jarrett, and I said, Femi, please, how are you? We greeted each other. He told me how his wife had died, and, you know, his house had moved and it got flooded out.
But the upshot was that he had the tape.
And I asked him, and he said he'll look and see if he has it. And Monday morning he called me. This was a Friday evening. He called me Monday morning, said, come and get your tapes. He had them.
Absolutely remarkable.
This is a remarkable story. 30 years. And
I think that really underscores your long relationship with Africa. And I think that speaks to the potential that could be shared between Africa and the Caribbean.
Well, I am home now. I'm back home. As you know, I'm also a Nigerian citizen, so I'm happy to be back home entirely. And it has come full circle from the days of fighting for apartheid, you know, against apartheid, fighting for the relationship. So I have now completed the circle and back home, you know, to do what I need to do.
Ambassador Wallace Williams, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Charles. A pleasure.
Now, my thanks to our special guest for this week, Ambassador Wallace Williams. Stay with us to meet this week's Talking Africa panel as we look back at the week that's been, the big stories, the big issues. We continue the conversation in London right here after this short break.
There is a reason Africa is called the new frontier. What was once potential is now an opportunity ready to be seized. Once revered for our resources, today's wealth lies in our people. People who build the cities that shape the future. People who know an idea in one place means business in another. A generation for whom technology means there are no borders, no boundaries. We are the new lions in a brave new world, kings of the urban jungle. And there's a bank that puts the world in our pocket and the future in our hands. UBA, Africa's global bank.
Welcome back to Talking Africa here on Arise News, a special weekly edition of Africa Wrap, where we take time to reflect on the fortunes and affairs of the emerging continent within its own countries and across the world in an hour of conversation with African commentators and thought leaders. Now, this week has been dominated by harrowing pictures of desperate migrants being plucked out of the Mediterranean Sea as they try to make the perilous journey from Africa into Europe. In a moment, I'll be discussing that tragic state of affairs with my guests, the social commentators Isabella Lisk and Susan Fajana Thomas. But first, let's remind ourselves of the issues involved.
European leaders arrived at the Brussels summit facing a moral dilemma. Come up with a plan to save migrants from drowning, but do nothing to encourage more to make a perilous journey across the Mediterranean.
It is about halting the human trade by brutal traffickers. It is about fighting the reasons for their fleeing. But most of all, and this is the most important, it is about rescuing human lives.
Others said there'd be no quick fix.
Nobody has any illusions that we can solve the problem today. No, we cannot, because the real causes are war, instability and poverty in the whole region. And for sure, Europe is not the cause of the whole situation in the Mediterranean.
European leaders are expected to approve a plan to resettle only 5,000 migrants, a tiny fraction of more than 100,000 who make it to Europe every year. They're also expected to order the setting up of asylum centres in Greece and Italy, and to take military action to destroy rickety boats used by people smugglers, which lay along the shorelines of countries like Libya and which so often sink before they reach southern Europe. In Malta, funerals for some of the around 800 migrants who perished at sea last weekend. Someone's son and someone's daughter, but in death, just a number. We'll never know where their journey to a hoped-for new life began. Today, it ended in Malta.
This event reminds us that we are all immigrants, and our life is a journey of migration.
European leaders will pledge to work with failed states like Libya to end the causes of mass migration, but that's a long-term solution. Meanwhile, many seeking sanctuary and prosperity in Europe are still going to die before they arrive. John Cookson, Arise News.
And joining me now are the social commentators Isabella Lisk and Susan Fajana Thomas. Thank you very much indeed to both of you for coming in. Now, you heard the main elements of that EU plan to arrest the problem of migrants. Was it what you wanted them to decide at that EU summit? Or if not, what would you have wanted to see or hear that would have made a difference to this migrant issue?
Thank you. What I didn't hear what I wanted to hear. It is, yes, it is a welcoming package, but having said that, I would have loved EU leaders to do more in terms of offering refugee status. They're only going to take 5,000 refugees or migrants as refugees. I would have loved EU leaders to be able to do more than that. What they're focusing on again is about policing. It's about policing the sea. I would have loved them to do more in tackling or in supporting the countries where these migrants are coming from, in tackling the cause of migration in those countries.
That's a rather tall order, isn't it?
Not really. You have to tackle the causes of this problem to stem the flow. And in the meantime, you have to show humanitarian intervention by saving those who are in trouble. For example, you know, someone was interviewed having made the perilous journey, and it was his 4th attempt. So where the EU are saying that by stopping intervention and not saving, you know, reducing patrols was going to help and stem the flow, they are dealing with people who are desperate at both sides, both at the start of the journey and the sea, you know, caught between the deep sea and the devil. And they will do anything to improve their lot, or what they think is improving their lot.
Of course, the big problem here is Libya. and the porousness of Libya's borders, as well as the power vacuum there. I mean, under those circumstances, is it actually realistic to talk about trying to institute some sort of control around Libya's borders?
Not at all. That takes me back to what I said earlier. It is about support. What you said about the vacuum, the leadership vacuum in Libya, that needs to be addressed. It's not the EU leaders that will address that, but they've got a role in supporting the people of Libya to be able to do that.
This sounds, of course, like, if it continues, that we may well see some robust military action around Libya. I mean, after the last foray into that country, should the West have learned lessons about the impact of any sort of military action in Libya?
I think that they should learn lessons. They are dealing with a different regime, and they're not dealing with one regime, actually. There are various groups and factions that are jostling for position, and in going into Libya, they've actually destabilized it. And therefore, you have the porous borders, you have people fleeing because they can't, there is no rule or any concerted effort to help the migrants. Who would the European governments be dealing with? There is no one particular group of people or formal process in which to do this. However, they cannot just go in as well. In terms of a humanitarian perspective, there are people suffering, so I do believe that they have to broker some sort of deal where they can help, if that is what Libya wants.
Right, so the other issue, of course, which you touched on there, is how the Libyan people might react to all of this. Because, I mean, let's face it, you'd essentially be talking about invading Libyan waters with the aim of destroying the capacity of these traffickers. The problem of the large number of deaths does not seem, though, to be deterring people from taking on this journey.
That shows the level of desperation these people are. They are in desperate situation. They're escaping war. Some of them poverty. Some of them is because of their safety. So it's like, if I stay here, there is a possibility I'll be killed or I'm going to die. So what stopped me from making that journey? At least I know that I've attempted it. If at all I die on my way, I die going seeking safety.
But do you not think that targeting the traffickers would be a good way to start? Because the bottom line is that these traffickers are the people who facilitate the strip across the Mediterranean.
Absolutely. That would be the perfect solution. But we know that they are maybe 1 or 2 levels removed from the perpetrators. The captain of the boat probably doesn't know who is behind the financing of all this. You have to follow the trail of the money. It's like any big scale fraud, or maybe even drug trafficking. It takes time to get to the people who are actually responsible. The captain of the boat is just, in my opinion, the fall guy, and the bigger players are at the back, trying to orchestrate all of this. So it's going to take a lot of picking through.
Your final thoughts on that?
Traffickers have been successful because there's been demand. So that is what we need to look at, or that's what EU leaders and other people tackling the issue of migrant death on the sea need to look at.
Okay, stay with us. We'll take a very short break here, but when we come back, we'll be looking at another of the main stories of the week, the jailing of the former Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Talking Africa here on Arise News. Let's continue the conversation with my guests, the social commentators Isabella Lisk and Susan Fajana Thomas. Now, one of the other main stories of the week was the jailing for 20 years of the former Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi for ordering the detention and torture of opposition protesters by Muslim Brotherhood supporters. It was a story that got little coverage elsewhere in the Middle East and even less sympathy for Mr. Morsi. Some even complained that the sentence was too lenient. Harsh sentences, some thought. Lenient sentences, others sort of thought. Was it a surprise to you? Did you expect that it was going to be worse than that?
Yes, and the worst would be death, and that Damocles sword is still hanging over him. If we take a look at the way this has unfolded, some would say that there hasn't been due process, and Amnesty are not happy, and the Muslim Brotherhood, who traditionally back him, have been routed, and quite a few people actually have been jailed, at least 1,212 people.
Right. Nevertheless, for Egypt's former presidents, the die appears to be cast. Why do you think he fell so spectacularly from grace?
I think it is what usually happens with people or leaders if they don't expect themselves to be where they were. The Brotherhood or the Alliance Party were not expecting to get into power in 2011 when they got there. When they got there, they decided to misuse or abuse that power in terms of not looking at the fact there is Egypt rather than an Islamic state. So I think that is the main thing, because he wasn't a leader for Egyptians, rather a leader for Islamist group. That is what basically made him fall, I believe.
And what are your thoughts on the fact that Western leaders have been rather quiet about this sentence?
I think Egypt is in a very strong position. This is their first democratically elected president, and he didn't last that long. So they have a history of tightly controlling their political affairs. It would have been, and also we have the specter of ISIS, the Islamic State, in and around that region. So they're going to be looking at for allies, and are going to try and...
So they want a strong man,
exactly, they do.
Right.
So they're not going to upset everyone, because there are very few friends out there, I think.
Of course, part of the fallout of this is that the Muslim Brotherhood, amid allegations of all kinds of abuses against them, have essentially been criminalized and called a terrorist movement. Is that fair?
To some extent, yes, that is fair. They have committed committed crime in to some extent. But having said that, I'm a bit worried in terms of how Egypt politics is interfering with the judicial system. I don't think in terms of dealing with them in terms of being a terrorist group. If, yes, you found them to be a terrorist group, there should be a due process of bringing them to justice, not that you don't want them and you will try to get rid of them by any way by interfering with the judiciary system. So that is wrong.
That's a very good point, because it's being suggested now that Egypt under Mr. Sisi is now a worse dictatorship than it was under Hosni Mubarak. I mean, do you think that is a fair statement?
I think the Egyptians themselves have sort of opened a Pandora's box in this instance. They wanted democracy, a form of democracy. They voted. And, you know, Mr. Sisi comes and says, well, no, you're not ready. This is how it should be. We don't want that. And just sweeps it aside. I think this is the precursor to what will happen if he doesn't agree with any of their politics. They have lost their voice or their power to bring about any change at the moment.
Of course, the Muslim Brotherhood has been around for an exceedingly long time. And we know that a lot of these movements, they tend to be, when they feel oppressed, they kind of go underground. It happened with with Boko Haram after their leader was killed. They sort of melted away and then came back considerably stronger. In a world in which radical groups seem to be affiliating with each other under the umbrella of the Islamic State, I mean, do you think that the Muslim Brotherhood might just go underground and resurface again?
That's exactly what I guess will happen. As you've said, we know that most of these groups, what they do when they go underground is about making alliances. Most of them are very resilient. And what you find is in another 1-2 years, they come back. And again, I'm very concerned because of ICIs and the operation around the region. All what they will be looking for is an alliance to come back, and because they felt what they've done, the sentence in the old of this trial being a farce. And they're not going to, they might be good, they might keep short now, but they're not going to keep short forever. That's one thing that I believe. They believe they have been wronged by the judicial system in Egypt, and they will come back fighting.
Okay, time for another very short break now, but when we come back, we'll be shifting the focus to some of the more positive stories emerging out of Africa in the week gone by. Stay with us. Welcome back to Talking Africa here on Arise News. I'm with the social commentators Susan Fajana-Thomas and Isabella Lisk, and I think it's time for us to take a look at some of the more positive stories emerging out of Africa. Now, Susan, you were interested in talking about literacy in Africa. It does still appear to be trailing literacy levels in the developed world, but there's been some progress which you wanted to talk about.
Yes, it is trailing, but there has been progress in the last 10 years. It is the numbers of people, young people that are actually going through primary education have massively or significantly increased in the last 10 years, which is very positive news. And I'm particularly happy about this because there's been the disparity in terms of gender. Many of the girls who has not been going to school now, they have been enrolling to actually that primary education. They're having it. It's not that they're ending up getting married at the 10 and 11 the way it used to happen in the past. Now they're going through primary education, so it is a very positive thing.
It's fairly broad to say the whole continent, though. I mean, are there areas where it's happening more, or
in the sub-Saharan Africa,
right,
it is happening more because in terms of the data that is available, it is the percentage has gone up in those areas than the other part of Africa. Well, that's
certainly something to be welcomed. Now, Isabella, you were struck by the work of Dr. Santorino Data, who's a pediatrician based at Mbarara University in Uganda. He's come up with a gadget that can help give newborn babies with breathing difficulties the urgent assistance they need.
Absolutely. I like gadgets. And I like gadgets when they come from Africa and they have been sort of invented. So Africa, usually we have suffered because lack of energy, reliable energy, money, technology. And so it's very good news that infant mortality will be reduced by this seemingly simple gadget. It's called Augmented Infant Resuscitator, or AIR, which I think is very apt. Well, it is a gadget that is put over the baby's mouth and nose when they're breathing difficulties, and it also gives the resuscitator, that is the doctor or the nurse, or even a layperson, I believe, can use this, indication as to whether they are respirating the baby properly. So it's not only that you respirate, but you must respirate properly so that the air goes in and makes a difference.
So is that an innovation in Africa? Because it's been happening in, I mean, they've had a gadget like that in other parts of the world, or
Yes.
is that a sort of global invention that will
I think that the way it is,
change the world?
there are various forms of this, but they are very expensive, so they're not very common in Africa. So the way this works and the way it is hooked up to electronics gives a very simple indicator: green for go, that the baby's been respirated, and red for some adjustment is needed. And you need this sort of warning system, quite apart from the device itself. You need this sort of warning system because the minutes are very crucial.
Well, that sounds like a real breakthrough. Now, Susan, you were observing in the week of International Book Day that some of the most spectacular libraries in the world are to be found in Africa.
That's right. There's been a list of about 11 libraries in Africa, and you find they're not just about architecture. They're about the collection of books in those libraries. And we are talking about literacy. We are talking about supporting Africans to achieve. So for Africa to have this great library that support education, it is a good thing. And some of the libraries can be found, 2, 3 can be found in one country. What I would like to see is for other countries in Africa to emulate a country like Egypt, a country like South Africa, to have state-of-the-art libraries that provide for their citizens.
And just very briefly, you were also quite excited about the fact, I mean, you know, you talked about education earlier, but the fact that almost as many girls as boys are now getting an education. In Africa.
That's a very positive thing, because Africa is a continent where you've had the adverse impact of child marriage that is stopping young girls going to school. So we have seen an improvement in that.
Right, and that's obviously quite significant. Now, Isabella, you were excited about the news that Sierra Leone has begun testing an Ebola vaccine with some measure of success.
With some measure of success. Ebola wrought havoc on the West Coast, and over 25,000 people were infected, over 10,000 people lost, and it's been a year. So we have been waiting for positive news. The news that the vaccines, there are 2 main ones that are being tested, that the monkeys are responding to this after 3 days of being infected.
That's the one in America.
The one in America, right. And that these, the information is being shared so that it comes into Sierra Leone and that they start testing this, because some people are left with side effects, and that is the main complaint now, that while people have recovered their side effects, it hasn't completely disappeared, so the vaccine is needed, and they need to be ready for anything that may crop up later on. Some people are also very skeptical and wary about, they don't want to be guinea pigs, but I believe that the controls and the money that is behind this, £25 million, is being put to good use.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that. Some very positive stories there. My thanks to Susan Fajana Thomas and Isabella Lisk, and to our guest from earlier, Ambassador Wallace Williams. We're back every night with Africa Wrap at 1800 GMT here on Arise News. From me, Charles Onyegolu, and from the entire team here in London, goodbye and thank you for watching.